of Congress. We want to go through a normal, regular process, both in the Senate and the House, and we're working well with both tax drafting committees. And the committees will continue to work, and they're working really, really well and really quickly. And we're trying to drive tax reform as quickly as we can. I think you know the basic premise behind it. I'm not going to take you through what we've talked about before. You know, again, a question we get asked a lot, so I'll say it right now. You know, we have to make some basic assumptions right now on where we're going to end up with the brackets, but I'll tell you, based on our assumptions, a typical family earning $100,000 with 2 children that has been a standard deductor, who uses the standard deduction, continues to use the standard deduction, they can expect a tax cut of about $1,000. That's where we're headed, and that's where we're going to continue to be. And with that, I think I'll open it up to questions and see what's on your mind. Go ahead.
Gary, the big criticism, well, there's been some criticisms that it's a giveaway to the rich, but the one criticism that seems to be relevant for your home state, Connecticut, California, other states, is that by eliminating the state and local deduction, there are certain people who will suffer double taxation. These are obviously itemizers. But is that a hard and fast red line with you, or would you be willing to give that up in congressional negotiations?
Our plan is based on lowering rates and expanding the base. It's very simple if you think of what we're doing. You expand the base by getting rid of the loopholes that the wealthy taxpayers have used to pay tax on less of their income. So we have designed a plan where you're going to pay a lower rate, but you're going to pay it on more of your income. That is a basic core premise of our plan, and we're committed to it, and we're sticking with it.
But the criticism is that there are some people in the middle income for whom this tax cut is supposed to be beneficial because they itemize, who might get hit by that.
So just to remind everyone in here, 25% of American families today itemize. That's it. 75% of American families do not itemize. So when you're talking about itemizers, you're talking about 25% of the population. We also have many things that we're doing in the tax plan to help out American families. We're lowering tax rates. We're going from 7 rates to 3 rates. We're expanding the 0 rate up to $24,000 for that family. First $24,000 of income, they will pay 0 on. We're lowering the 15% rate down to 12%. So the next rate will be 12%. We're doing things to help that family. We're expanding the parameters for child care greatly. We're really going to move the upper bound to who's eligible for child care up to a substantially higher income level. So that family may be eligible for more and more credit. You have to look at this plan in its entirety. The one thing I would beg you all to do is don't look at any one piece. Look at the plan in its entirety. That's how we're looking at tax reform. We're looking at it in its entirety. Yeah.
Follow up on what John was asking, the standardized deduction versus itemizing. There are people who think that if you dissuade people from itemizing, that you're going to suppress the real estate market, that people won't be interested in buying homes because they won't need to use itemized deductions. Can you address their concerns?
First of all, we're protecting the mortgage interest deduction. And second of all, look, the home builders today came out in favor of our tax plan. The number one reason why people buy homes is they're excited and optimistic about the economy. They have a job today. They feel confident they're going to have a job tomorrow, and their kids are going to get a job, and their spouse has a job. They feel like there's upward wage pressure. They feel like there's mobility in their job, and they feel good about the economy. That's when people go out and buy homes. We've not been in that situation in America for the last decade. We have to get America back to a place where people feel excited and exuberant about the economy. When they do that, they'll go out and spend money. They'll buy homes. People don't buy homes because of the mortgage deduction. Again, 75% of families don't use itemized deductions. Yeah, right.
How are you going to ensure that wealthy taxpayers don't abuse the lower pass-through rate in the plan?
So it's a great question. We have spent an enormous amount of time on the anti-abuse language for pass-throughs. The last thing we want to see is wealthy individuals or wealthy groups or families move their tax rate down from the 35% rate to a 25% rate. We are spending time on that. The tax writers at both the House and the Senate are acutely aware of this issue. We've got language on it. You will be seeing the language as we deliver more of the details.
Today, though, on how
No, what the specific is, we're acutely aware of that. Guys like myself should not be allowed to put their assets into a partnership and reduce our tax liability by 10%. Yeah.
just
just two things about one thing that you said this morning and something the president said yesterday. You said that you couldn't guarantee necessarily that no middle-class taxpayers would actually pay more taxes under this plan, and because of the details that you were talking about just before, that is a real possibility. Some of the calculations are that some lower-income people could see a very small cut of a few dollars or not more than that. So is it a red line for you and for the president that, that all middle-class taxpayers see a cut under this plan? And then secondly, the president said yesterday that this tax cut would not help him. In fact, he said in Indiana that it would be bad for him. But based on what we know, what little that we know about his finances, he'd get a big cut on the AMT. I think he would save something like $31 million. On pass-through income, he'd save $16.5 million. He'd obviously save a lot not paying the estate tax, his heirs would. So how can he say that this is not a plan that would help him?
I think what the American people are concerned about is their financial position. I think what they're concerned about is when they go to work every week and they get their paycheck at the end of the week, how much do they get to keep? How much goes in their pocket versus how much goes to the government? How much do they get to spend versus how much do they send to the government? If we allow a family to keep another $1,000 of their income, what does that mean? They can renovate their kitchen. They can buy a new. They can buy a new car. They can take a family vacation. They can increase their lifestyle. That's what our tax plan is to do. Our tax plan is aimed to return more income back to hardworking Americans. That's what we're trying to do here.
Speaking of pass-throughs and the president saying that this tax plan wouldn't benefit him, don't you think it would be a good idea if the president proved that by releasing his tax returns?
Like I said, what we're trying to do here and what we're all working on in the White House is to increase the lifestyle of American citizens, our hardworking citizens that get up every morning and work as hard as any people in the world to try and keep more of their hard-earned income. That's what we're all about. That's what our tax plan is about. Our tax plan is trying to get the economy, to get the growth rate back to a normalized rate above 3%. Yes, we just had a quarter of 3.1% GDP. People didn't think we could get to 3.1% GDP for a while. We're at 3.1. Can we go higher? What does 1% of GDP mean? 1% of GDP means $3 trillion. It more than pays for a tax cut. That's what we're trying to do with our tax plan. Yes.
Hey, Gary, if you can't guarantee that all middle-class Americans won't see, or some middle-class Americans won't see their taxes go up, does that contradict the central promise of this plan to help all middle-class Americans?
Our tax plan is aimed at making sure we give middle-class Americans a tax cut. We are going to give middle-class Americans a tax cut. That is what we are spending all of our time on doing. And we've got lots of tools at our disposal to make sure we do that, and that's what we're going to do.
All of them will see a tax cut?
As I said this morning, and I'll say it again, I could read my statement from this morning. I liked it so much this morning. I'd say it to you again. I cannot guarantee that. You could find me someone in the country that their taxes may not go down. Remember, we have 50 states, we have counties, we have cities, we have long-term capital gains, we have short-term capital gains. We have all different types of structures in the tax code. I'll guarantee you, you could find someone in this country, maybe one person who their taxes may not go down. Yeah.
Gary, can you walk us through the timeline for how you think the tax rating committees will get through this, and what confidence do you have that given what's happened so far this year on Capitol Hill that they will actually get this done? And secondly, why did you decide to stay at the White House in the wake of Charlottesville?
So I'm very confident that the House and the Senate are working as quickly as they can. If you look at Chairman Brady right now and what he's doing in the House Ways and Means Committee, they are working. They came in on Sunday to start working on the tax plan. They continue to work every day. Chairman Brady has said that they will get through the tax plan as quickly as they can. We would hope that we get through the House in October. We would hope to be in the Senate in November, and we hope to have a bill done by this year. Why am I here? I'm here just for this reason. Think about the opportunity that I'm involved in with the President Trump in being able to rewrite the tax code, something that hasn't been done for 31 years. The amount of impact that we can have on the U.S. economy and U.S. citizens in changing the forward outlook of the United States, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I would never miss this.
Gary, one follow on that, and then my question, which was, does that mean when you're done with tax reform that you will no longer be at the White House? Did you mean to imply that? But when you talked about...
There are many more once-in-a-lifetime opportunities at the White House.
We'd love to hear what would make you stay. On the child tax credit, which we have heard Ivanka Trump talk about, campaign on, can you give us any kind of description as to what that will look like? I know it's still being written, but what is the goal here? Will it be refundable? What are some of the broad outlines?
So I think we said in our outline yesterday, if you read it, the existing child care credit is refundable and will stay refundable. The additional money that will be put into the credit will be non-refundable. We want to encourage people to work. We want to have people have taxable income to take the credit against. The size of it, we're still working out as that is what we have a range in mind. Yes.
Can you give us an
We're
assessment
continuing
of
to work on that range. Again, we are working on delivering a large middle income tax cut to American workers, one that they rightfully deserve. Let me go back to the Amen.
Thank you. The Committee for Responsible Budget said that the plan will add $2.2 trillion to the deficits. Are they wrong?
We think they're wrong, but we think they're wrong because the way they score. But let's not argue if they're right or wrong. Let's not argue that. We firmly believe that this tax plan will have a dramatic impact on economic growth. We know that 1% change in GDP will add $3 trillion back. So if they're right, we're only going to pay down $800 billion of the deficit. I'll live with $800 billion paid down. Amen?
Gary.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate the opportunity. On the corporate side, your critics say that on the repatriation of overseas assets, that history would show that companies don't always use those assets when they're repatriated to invest in manufacturing and jobs and the things that you guys are talking about. They do share buybacks and other financial engineering. How can you guarantee that that won't happen this time?
So, look, we've heard that numerous times. If that's our worst case scenario, that companies repatriate their money and they use it for share buybacks and dividends, what happens? They buy back shares, they issue dividends. They pay the repatriation tax, we get another 20% tax on capital gains or dividends, and then the people that get that money back do what? They reinvest it back in the economy, in new investments, in new capital. We're putting some very enticing rules into the system that will entice people to invest capital for the next 5 years. We're giving people a 5-year write-off that they can instantly expense. So, look, if that happens, that's fine. We know that that money will get invested right back in the economy and drive jobs, drive economic growth, drive wages, and drive prosperity. Right over here.
Thank you, Gary. You've been asked a question twice, and you didn't answer. I'd like to get you to answer this, because I get your messaging on the middle class. You've made that very clear. But this tax plan, as it stands now, appears that it will benefit the president and his family. Why not just be candid about that?
Look, I've told you it will benefit the middle class. I think that's what American taxpayers care about, what they take home. They care about what they have to spend. That's what they care about. That's what I care about. I care about what I pay in tax. I bet you care about what you pay in tax.
The president's message is here too, and he's saying he won't benefit, yet it appears as though the way this is put together, he actually will. And it gets to the idea of wealthy Americans around this country, which people do care about. So can you just
let me take you through the components that you're all obsessed upon for a minute. Now, Sarah's going to yell at me because I'm taking too long here. So you all talk about the death tax, and that being a great benefit. The two biggest drivers for repeal of the death tax are the NFIB and the Farm Bureau. That's small businesses and farms. Those are the two organizations that spend the most time lobbying on the repeal of the death tax. Death tax has the biggest effect on them, small businesses and farms. Wealthy Americans do a lot of estate planning. They can use trust. They can use all types of things that are legal within the tax code to make sure they don't pay death tax. On the AMT, I'm not going to get into deep calculations on AMT, but at a broad brush level, when you do the AMT, once you get rid of the deductions of state and local taxes, that's the biggest add back in AMT. AMT becomes irrelevant once you get rid of the deduction of state and local taxes. So all the things that you're trying to pull at, you're not looking at the plan in its entirety. They don't make sense once we redo the plan and once we simplify. Yes.
Gary.
You're welcome.
Gary.
Yes. You. Yeah.
Just as a follow-up question on that, in your penultimate appearance of this group, you said that I cited to you the worry of groups such as Jim Martin and the 60-plus Seniors Association that you were going to drag out repeal of the death tax, that it wouldn't be immediate, and you said at the time it was immediate. Is that final? Is it going to be an immediate repeal and go off the books as soon as the new tax reform package is passed?
In our outline, it's immediate. It's immediate.
And the same with the alternative minimum tax?
It's immediate. Everything's immediate. The only thing that phases out is the 5-year expensing, is a 5-year expensing. Yes.
Last one, guys. Speaking of small businesses, let's start negotiating, because yesterday Senator Schumer said that Democrats may be willing to work some kind of small business tax relief into whatever comes out of all this. Where do you start negotiating on that? What offer do you want to make, perhaps, to the Democrats?
Our offers, our opening offer and our final offer are on the table. We were happy to start at 25, and we're happy to go lower, and we're happy to start at 20 on corporates and go lower. So there's our opening offer. If he wants to counter something lower, we're very negotiable. Thank you.
Gary,
one more.
Thank you, Gary. And
The boss says I gotta go.
now, try to be respectful of y'all's time. We've also got Tom Bosser that'll come up and talk about the hurricane relief efforts and take questions specific to that, and then I'll come up after that. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon. As you know, President Trump has put people first and paperwork second. He's had us call out and pull out all the stops and promote as much federal relief into Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands as we could muster, and we've been ongoing in our efforts to accomplish that, meet his objectives over the last 8 days, and I'm here to take some questions. I know you've heard some reporting from Sarah, so if I could just jump right in. Peter.
If I can ask you, first of all, thanks for being here. Specifically on the Jones Act, which has been the focus of a lot of attention in the course of the last 24 to 72 hours right now. Critics say the White House should have moved more quickly in waiving the Jones Act. Lawmakers among them. Why is that an unfounded complaint?
Okay, so it is an unfounded complaint, and here's why. The Jones Act, real briefly stated, is a rule that favors flagged vessels, U.S. flagged vessels. If there are not enough U.S. flagged vessels, the capacity, in other words, to meet the need, then we waive the Jones Act. In this particular case, we had enough capacity of U.S. flagged vessels to take more than or to exceed the requirement in need of diesel fuel and other commodities into Puerto Rico. What happened is, I think almost 17 or 18 days worth of now what you're seeing backlogged diesel fuel need in the island. And so but it was a little bit misunderstood and misreported that we had a capacity problem and had to waive the Jones Act. Not the case. The idea here is that we had provided as many commodities as were necessary to the island. The challenge became then land-based distribution. That remains the challenge. That remains the priority today. However, last night, Governor Rosello called me a little after 8 o'clock and said, at this point, to ensure that the additional needs are met as we move forward, it might be a good idea to proactively make sure that we pull out all the stops just in case that capacity problem ran into the requirement problem. I talked to the president. He thought that was absolutely the right thing to do, and waived it right away. So that was not too late. It was not even too early. It was just the right thing to do proactively.
To be very clear, through this point, that obviously distribution is one of the biggest challenges. You talked about 44 of 69 hospitals now being up and running as necessary to bring those people whose lives are at risk. What percentage of the country would you say you really haven't had a chance to even explore to see how they've been impacted by this?
Yeah, so it's hard to answer the percentage of the country, so I'll answer it this way. Through aerial surveillance, we've seen the entirety of Puerto Rico. Some of the southwest and southeast sections of the island have had a little bit more sparse on-foot exploration, but it's the interior of the island that's presenting the biggest problem for us right now. The mountainous interior is where we're dedicating our efforts to try to get in with rotary wing support. The margins, so to speak, are now open to airports and seaports, so that's where we're freeing up some of that delivery. But again, back to the Jones Act question, we had, up until the waiver last night, enough capacity in U.S. flagged vessels to get all the commodities necessary into the island. We just then ran into the priority challenge of distributing land-based commodities into the people, and that's, if I can pivot before I take the next question, that's a challenge or a function of two problems. First, the capacity of the locals in the state were diminished because those people are victims as well that work for the state and work for the local authorities. And then secondly, the debris and down power lines had to be pushed out of the way. And so we've got the resources there to do that now, but that's the challenge remaining. The central interior is going to be reviewed and looked at very carefully over the next 24, 48 hours to make sure we're getting the needs of the people met.
Quick follow-up, John, if I could. Had Governor Rossella, Tom, not requested protectively a waiver in the Jones Act, would you have seen a compelling reason to initiate a waiver?
I wouldn't have, and I wasn't recommending to the president that he waive the Jones Act at the time until I got the governor's request. And maybe a historical note of relevance. Sometimes we'll see the carriers request the waiver, right? So you'll have foreign flag vessels or U.S. flag vessels or carrier companies call us and say, please waive it because there's an issue. We didn't get, to my knowledge, any carrier requests. But once the governor calls and says proactively, as I see out into the future on the horizon, then I think that we should listen to him, and the president completely agreed. So
is this just all overhyped in simple terms?
Well, perhaps misunderstood. I think there's also some critics that believe that it was a price issue, and for those, I can't answer it. I don't know how the markets price these things, but I can tell you it was already bought and paid for by the U.S. taxpayer in a humanitarian effort, and I think it's an absolutely wise investment to save lives, whether they're U.S. citizens or not. In this particular case, we've got U.S. Virgin Islands citizens, Puerto Rican citizens, all American citizens. I think that's the right investment to make. Whether it could have changed the price point, I don't know. There was an op-ed piece on that. But capacity is the issue. Life-saving requirements, that's the need, and we had that capacity met. So, I go to the middle, please. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Tom. Your need is immediate, and with all the challenges that are coming, what are the conversations about with airdrops, just airdropping in certain areas, because people are talking about running out of water, running out of food, like in hours or minutes. What's happening with that conversation? And also, once again, an issue of housing. We're hearing about ships, cruise ships. What else is going on with this?
So there's a number of things happening. With respect to the distribution of commodities, that is the biggest challenge right now. But the restoration of power is also a big challenge, and I'll tell you why. Energy here, electric power, is supplying the hospitals that are providing medical care to the wounded and those that brought medical conditions and had chelation needs and other needs. So there's a kind of a dual priority going on in terms of power restoration, emergency power, and then blocking, clearing, pushing out of the way all the roads to open them up so we can get commodities delivered. There's still a shortfall there, though, and that is drivers for all those trucks. So we are pushing personnel in to augment state and local authorities to continue to push those commodities. What you saw today, though, I think was some reporting and some loop footage of some trucks sitting on ports and docks. We're moving those trucks quickly. We're also prioritizing what needs to come off first so that we can get generators.
Airdrops circumvent all of that, having to rebuild infrastructure, move things away?
Yeah, at this point, if airdrops are under consideration, I'm not aware of it, but I would promote it if it's a faster way to get food and water to people who are in need. We now have a one-star general, General Kim, in place, who's in charge of all ground force operations to make sure there's one person in charge of marshaling all those efforts. And if he recommends airdrop, then I think we airdrop. Sir?
I've got a text here from a volunteer who has boots on the ground, and he says that they need helicopters to evacuate people from remote areas of the island. And he says there are people burying their family members in front yards. Communication is badly needed, and they look at apocalyptic conditions between 48 and 72 hours. There's a little bit of disconnect from what I'm hearing here and what they're telling me there. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, no, there's no disconnect. If that's accurate, then it needs to be addressed and remediated immediately. So what I want to do here is be careful not to micromanage it from here. That's the mistake you've seen in the past. I believe, I'm confident anyway, that we've got enough resources marshaled and deployed forward to make those decisions under the right command and leadership structure. What we've done, and as I've explained in the past, is we've had to augment and change our business model in the field. We did that last Thursday in earnest. You saw the effects of it over the weekend. But what we did is said we had to augment the local and state authorities, not just at the top, but all the way out through and to the lower level. So now there are federal officials that are identifying needs and requirements, requesting them of the state level, augmenting the state level to validate those requirements, and then from the federal side providing them. So we are in every stage of the identification, validation, and provision of requirements and delivery of them to people in need. And a couple of things here. First, people seeing 24 and 48-hour horizon problems where they're saying, I don't see enough food and water coming. It's my sincere belief that food and water is going to get to them before that deadline arises, and then we're going to save their lives. I have no doubt in it. We've got over 10,000 people there now, and there's more on their way, including a lot of aerial support, USS Comfort, I'm going to read the numbers here for you. There's 12 Coast Guard cutters, 3 United States Navy ships, 1 DOT Maritime Administration vessel, 6 commercial ships with supplies en route. This was as of 5 a.m., so there's more since. 7 additional ships to house responders. And we've got commodities distribution now exceeding millions, so 1.3 million meals, 2.7 million liters, that type of thing of water. So that's moving in today, and you're seeing the distribution problem unclogged. Now, if there's somebody burying somebody in their front yard, that's an absolutely terrible story. What I don't want to do, though, is project it as the norm. And I think there's a careful distinction here. Right now, we've seen 16 fatalities confirmed from the state authorities. No fatalities acceptable. If that number increases significantly, that will be a devastating blow. We are doing everything we can to prevent that. Loss of life from the storm is one thing. Loss of life that's preventable is another, and that's why we're trying to marshal our resources. Ma'am?
Senator Rubio, who just got back from the island, says there are significant logistical concerns with the administration's response. He says there's no clear command, control, and communication between local and federal agencies, and he says this requires a response led by DOD. Is that option on the table here?
Sure, it's already been undertaken. So I was with the senator briefly on Monday in Puerto Rico, and I think what he's identifying there is something that we already had in place a solution for. So he's identifying a traditional problem between municipal and state government authorities. Normally FEMA and the federal government would provide aid to the governor, to the state, and then they would work it out with the local authorities. What we've identified here as of last Thursday, and you saw it implemented over the weekend, was a lack of capacity coupled with this insular, several hundred-mile away, divided by an ocean island problem. And so what we've done is provided federal authorities, largely guys in green, right, Title 10 and Title 32 forces, but also FEMA emergency managers to stand next to each of those municipality leaders, whether they're mayors or local authority figures like the Water Authority or Electric Authority leaders, and they're being augmented by federal forces. So we've addressed those challenges in communicating between local and state authorities by augmenting them with federal staff. That's something that wasn't necessarily apparent to the senator as he got there. He identified a problem, but it was a problem already being fixed, and it's one that he probably wasn't able to see at the municipal level for 2 reasons. One, he didn't get out there to them. Neither of us could make it out to the municipal levels when we visited on Monday. And 2, there was a communications problem of grave import that persists to this day, and that communications problem is tied to the electric power restoration problem. So if I could, before I take the next question, let me explain why and how the power restoration process is unfolding. What we decided to do is take the action of putting the United States Army Corps of Engineers in charge of power restoration on the island. So to your question about whether the military is in charge, it depends on the mission and function. They're in charge of a lot, but not everything. The people of Puerto Rico are strong, competent, and where they're not diminished in capacity, they're in charge, and that's the best way to handle things. But where they're not able and where they have diminished capacity, we're taking extreme steps. So a direct federal assistance order was given, a mission assignment was given. I've heard others on TV quibble whether it's a mission or not. We make it clear, General Semonite from the United States Army Corps of Engineers has been given a mission to restore power on Puerto Rico, writ large, full stop. He has some priorities. His priorities are temporary power generation right now. That's the big diesel run generators that are supporting the hospitals and other life-saving capabilities. 2, permanent generation. He's going to restore the damaged power generation capacity on the south of the island. 3, transmission. Those are the big lines that transmit power to and from. And then 4thly, distribution. That's the last mile capillaries hook up to the houses and that type of power generation. So those are his priorities. And I'm pretty certain that the Puerto Rican people are going to see the results of the dedicated Army Corps of Engineers mission. Ma'am?
Flights have gotten out of South.
I'm going to call it this, ma'am.
If airdrops would help, why are those not happening? Is that a military issue? Is that a problem with them not stepping up?
Yeah, it's my belief right now that both the state government and most of the municipalities involved have identified the fastest route as available to them, being ground-based. If that's not the case, then I'm confident, but I want to make sure that I don't step in between something that I could be far removed from. If the ground force commander down there has identified an airdrop mission as faster and more productive, then I endorse it from here. I certainly wouldn't question his judgment. But it was my reporting understanding earlier today that they identified the fastest delivery methodology to be through ground-based means by clearing first and delivering second, and that we needed drivers and we're augmenting them, and they needed security forces, and we've applied those. There's a security force plan now laid down for each of the drivers so that they can feel safe.
Tom, several aid flights have gotten out of South Florida and managed to get to the island and deliver food and water without having logistical problems. There's severe criticism coming from South Florida now, saying that there's mismanagement coming all the way from the president.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, I'm not certain who you're talking about or who's criticizing us. There's plenty of criticism to go around, but I'm pretty confident.
Managed to get an aid flight into the island and get it unloaded, and he says the problems that you're having logistically are of your own making from not taking action sooner and bringing in the military sooner.
Well, first, I thank the mayor for providing aid. Second, the mayor's just dead wrong in this case, and I would challenge him to go down and get a better understanding first before rendering that verdict on what we've done, what we have been doing, and how blown away you're going to be when you see the full totality of the picture. So I'm certain that the mayor's had some positive experiences. I wouldn't be critical of him personally, but he's probably, just like with the Jones Act criticism that he rendered, just not yet informed on the facts. So thanks for that question.
Supplies through, and why is it that there are 10,000 containers waiting at the port of San Juan?
Well, to my point earlier, we're getting a lot of supplies through. It's just perhaps some misreporting that misunderstands that fact. Yeah.
The president has referenced some of the debt and economic problems that Puerto Rico has been struggling with for some time here. When you were talking about the lack of capacity, municipal and state level, I mean, are you faulting local officials for a lack of preparedness?
No, absolutely. No. Let me be clear. When I say capacity, I'm talking about the capacity problem of people being victims that would otherwise be the first responders, repairers, and managers of the municipal government functions. So what we're doing is trying to restore baseline municipal government functions because they've been affected. Their homes are destroyed, their families are put in peril. That's the capacity problem that I'm addressing. When you talk about money, I believe that the island authority in general was Puerto Rico, $72 billion in debt. There's a restructuring effort underway. Congress weighed in with the PROMESA Act, and that $72 billion is being restructured and handled through, in part, bankruptcy proceedings and so forth. So,
how is that impacting this response? Because the president brought it up.
Well, I think I know the president brought it up in terms of recovery, but here's how it affects the response. What it does is it puts the island in a position where they don't have the financial resources to meet the cost share requirement for all of these goods and resources, personnel, and material flowing into the island. What the president did was acknowledge that publicly and privately, realize that that would be a problem at the advice of the FEMA administrator, myself, and Secretary Duke, and he took the step of doing a 100% federal cost share adjustment to pay for all of this, from debris removal, debris pushing, power restoration, the Army Corps of Engineers, and all the emergency protective measures, police, fire, EMS, truck drivers, all those sorts of things, 180 days, so 6 months for the Virgin Islands and for Puerto Rico until we can get our hands around this. All of those functions, all those missions that I just described are all 100% federal cost share. We don't want anybody worried about paper. We want them worried about people. I'm going to take two more questions. So, sir, I
wanted to follow that a little bit and ask, as you're starting to envision down the road, if any sort of bailout might be part of the sort of broader recovery package that you look for in supplemental. And on that supplemental, I know the first crack at it will be relatively soon. Aides on Capitol Hill are suggesting that it could be the first week in October. Is that the timeline that you're anticipating?
Yeah,
you started to compile that.
As my colleague, Mr. Cohen, alluded to, we're certainly willing to negotiate with Congress if there's some better fiscal idea. From an emergency management perspective in the next coming weeks, it's important to understand that FEMA just got a $7.1 billion appropriation released on October 1st. And what's going to happen now is we're going to go back for more. We're going to ask for that in the form of an emergency supplemental to provide money into the fund that does this life-saving, life-sustaining effort and even some of the early recovery efforts. Whether we have to address or should address at that point their existing $72 billion worth of debt and how it's been restructured is something that I'll have to take my lead from the economists on and from some of the budget hawks. But I think that the best idea here for us would be to focus on PROMESA and PRASA, the Electric Power Authority and the Water Authority. Those are the two concerning elements where they're going to have to be rebuilt. They're going to have to be rebuilt under proper management, and they're going to have to be rebuilt under proper rebuilding codes and standards to make sure that they can withstand a future hurricane and that we don't just go back to sticks and wires in the future. So we're going to put federal money into this. We should do it wisely and prudently. I've said that from this podium here before. President Trump believes in that seriously. I don't think we're going to have to address the debt restructuring issue in this next go-around, but if we do, and if Congress wants us to, President Trump's up to that challenge. I'm going
supplemental.
Well, it's going to have to come, I think, in the next 2 to 4 weeks, but I can't put a better date on it. I'd refer you to Director Mulvaney. Let me take one more question here.
I'm not sure if I still understand. Why has it taken 8 days to get a 3-star general on the ground to start organizing this? We know the island situation, et cetera, but why 8 days?
Yeah, well, because it didn't require a 3-star general 8 days ago. Let me explain to you how the process works. It'll be the best way of explaining the answer. We have a 3-star general in charge of this, and we had one in charge of this out of San Antonio from day -8 and day -2 and all the way through until today. We forward deployed a 1-star general, a brigadier general, to take care of ground force command once we realized the problem of logistics distribution had outstripped the capacity of the affected municipal governments. But that 3-star general was there and running and coordinating operations as an extension of NORAD, Northern Command. We've made a number of improvements to that distribution process and that marshaling of military resources since, for instance, General Honore experienced the problems he did in Katrina. We've matured quite a bit since that day. The 3-star command structure that he lacked back then has been put in place and has been in place for this response out of San Antonio and augmented by a Northern Command structure that's been pretty robust and forward-leaning here. They've been doing vocal authorities. They're not waiting for paperwork. They've been doing things that
intervene in a way which is neutral, independent, and impartial, and provide emergency assistance. The intent of the Burmese government to organize a visit for the diplomats and humanitarian organizations in the Rakhine state is a step in the right direction. I also wanted to welcome the remarkable work which is being carried by the High Commissioner for Refugees and the International Organization for Migration. They have to tackle, as a matter of highest urgency, the inflow of about 500,000 people into Bangladesh. The major effort made by Bangladesh, who took in about 700,000 Rohingyas, is also something that we need to welcome and supported by the international community. We encourage the authorities in Bangladesh to provide the necessary access to all of the humanitarian actors as a function of the needs of the population. Mr. President, I've just enumerated the most immediate challenges that we need to tackle. There are other three priorities inextricably linked to those, but that we also need to act on because they are necessary to make sure that we have a lasting solution to this crisis. And the first one is this. Once there is an end to violence, we need to clearly define the modalities needed for the safe, voluntary, and sustainable return of the refugees. A second priority is to start as quickly as possible a political process to make sure that we tackle the root causes of the violence, the discrimination and systematic violation of the rights of the Rohingya, who are deprived of citizenship for decades in Burma. The report submitted by the Advisory Commission on the Rakhine State, chaired by Kofi Annan, contains important recommendations on this topic, and the commitment of the government of Burma to implement these recommendations quickly and with determination is a first positive step, but this needs to be translated into action. And France reiterates its support to the civilian government as they continue and consolidate the process of democratic transition, which they started in 2015. We also welcome the effort undertaken by the countries in the region in order to find a way out of the crisis. Denying the rights to Rohingya, something that's been happening for decades, has engendered a radicalization of the minority amongst them. But the civilian population, even so, should not have to pay the price for the violence committed by an extremist group. And that is why, and this is the third challenge that we need to tackle, it is not possible to be silent in the face of massive violations of human rights, which could constitute crimes against humanity, as was stated by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The perpetrators of crimes have to be held legally accountable. And in the immediate future, we call upon the Burmese authorities to authorize full and complete access to all the human rights monitoring bodies, in particular the fact-finding mission established under the Human Rights Council in the month of March. The mission should be able to